Hello everybody, welcome back to another video with Saber Core. Today we're going to be going over a very simple yet somewhat unknown difference in the community with lightsaber electronics. And that difference that we're going to be going over today is stunt versus neopixel electronics in your sabers. So with me here I have got a saber configured with a stunt setup. This is an Ultra Sabers Apprentice that we purchased, and this saber is configured with a neopixel setup, and we made this ourselves, one of our signature designs. And so we're just going to go into in-depth on what makes each which, the differences, and maybe the pros and cons. So first we're going to go through the more simple setup, which is the stunt setup. So a stunt setup is just a fancy way to say a switch section wired to a battery wired to an LED. When this is fully installed in a saber, you get a glorified flashlight, essentially. Still the beautiful looks of a saber, still makes light, but all you get is a switch on, switch off. No flash, no sound, no clash, no anything, none of that. All you get is just light. And depending on what LED you use, you can have a different level of light. This is a single Cree LED, and it only emits one color out of this one bulb. And you can also get things called tri-Cree LEDs that have 3 light-emitting diodes that can create a more unique color, depending on what it's wired up to be. So for the NeoPixel chassis, what you're going to have in a typical NeoPixel setup is you're going to have a circuit board. That could be a Profi board, it could be a CFX, it could be any number of boards that are out there on the market. Profi, CFX are some of the more expensive ones. Golden Harvest is another one. You're going to have an SD card in that, which is going to store your fonts and all of your programming that you can program yourself if you know what you're doing. But they usually, if you buy a prefabricated chassis like this, will come with pre-installed programming on it with a set number of sound fonts and so on. This board is wired in a bunch of different directions to a speaker down here at the bottom that emits your sound. The rechargeable battery usually, and then you have your switch section up here. The thing that makes this a NeoPixel blade and a NeoPixel setup that differentiates it between a traditional stunt setup is this right here. Now this is called your NeoPixel connector, and it is a bunch of tiny copper pins that connect to a copper disc on a NeoPixel blade. So now when this is activated, and I can show you in our saber here, you get sound, and you can program different activations. This one has a twist activation and deactivation. And you can see it still emits a little bit of light. But that little bit of light is not what's going to be powering your blade. So what's going to be powering your blade is all of these tiny little NeoPixel connectors that sends the electrical signal up through the LEDs in the blade that allows it to display whatever sound font, color, and lighting effects you have on it. So this is what you would consider more so the top tier, and this is what you consider more of the entry tier. So here we are outside right now to show you what a typical stunt setup might look like with a blade in it. So just put your blade in, tension screw, bam, there it is. This one's a nice fuchsia-y color. So again, all you get with this is you're getting a light. It illuminates your blade. You're not getting any clash effects, no sound, but it's bright, looks like a lightsaber. But again, this is like the entry level, what you're gonna find at the most base price for most things. Now we're out here with our NeoPixel setup and our NeoPixel blade. You can kind of see this copper disc here that touches those NeoPixel connectors that will illuminate the blade. So if I turn the saber on and then slide the blade in, there it is. So now, once the blade is off, you can see it deactivates like a saber should, and it activates like a saber should. So what that is done by is all of these LEDs that line the whole blade, and the way those LEDs work is through the NeoPixel connector and the connector disc that is powered by your circuit board with the SD card, with all of your sound fonts, lighting effects, and what have you. Now with this, like I said, you're gonna get sound, you're gonna get clashes, blaster effects, and all sorts of different things. You have a smooth swing, and then, of course, the best part about a NeoPixel blade is the deactivation and activation. Looks like a saber. So now that you've seen some of the differences, we'll talk a little bit about the pros and the cons and where to find all of these different things. We'll start with the pros for a stunt setup. Stunt setups, they're cheap, they're easy to install if you're going to do it yourself, super easy to find, and they're quite durable. You can really beat a saber that has a stunt setup in it, and you're really not going to find too many issues because there's not too many electronics to get jostled around in there. Cons with a stunt setup: you only get one color, you don't get any sound, you don't get any programmable fonts, you don't get any different lighting effects, you don't get any smooth swing or anything like that. But yeah, there's still those pros that definitely make this worth a buy if you're on a limited budget. Now with the NeoPixel setup, let's go through the pros. The pros: you get all of the things that a stunt setup doesn't have. You get full lighting effects, sound fonts, clash, blaster effects, smooth swing, all of these different higher end electronic stuff that you don't get out of a stunt setup. Cons: they are much more expensive, and good NeoPixel chassis and things like this can be kind of or somewhat harder to find, and there's a lot more electronics in here to get jostled around, so I would not recommend dueling with the ferocity that you would use with a stunt setup with a NeoPixel, because there's a lot more to break, and then you're going to be shelling out more money to fix all the stuff that's broken. So there are some of the pros and cons between the two different types of setups. You can get different parts from them in different places. The wiring and the switches and different things like that that you need for a stunt setup if you're doing it yourself, you can find at a lot of different hardware stores, or on, I'm sure, Saber Bay or Custom Saber Shop sells prefabbed stunt setups for you to install into your hilt. Or you can just go to one of the big box retailers like Ultra Sabers or Saber Forge, and they'll sell stunt setups all put in the hilt for you, ready to go. Might be a little bit more pricey that way, but pros and cons of the hilt versus the electronics that you might want. For a NeoPixel saber, you're going to either have to put all the parts together yourself, which can be getting a Profi board, all the wiring, a speaker, an SD card, the NeoPixel connectors. All those parts can be bought separately, again, from those same websites and similar ones. Or you can go to Saber Bay, or again, similar websites that sell prefabricated whole chassis, like is in this one, which again, we produced ourselves. And all of our lightsabers have a solid 1-inch inner diameter to fit these prefabricated NeoPixel cores that you can again buy yourself and install if you so choose. Again, a little bit more pricey, potentially a little bit harder to find, but once you do find the good ones, they're not as expensive potentially as buying all of the different parts yourself. And there's different levels of even NeoPixel chassis. The ones with Profi boards are usually a little bit more expensive than the ones with CFX or Golden Harvest or whatever type of board is being used in it. So there are some pros and cons of stunt setups versus NeoPixels, the differences between each, why you might want them, and where you can find the different parts and prices to make all of these and make your perfect saber. We'll see you next time.